This machine is like a giant instrument, a new telescope to an astronomer. Instead of using it to search for new cosmological discoveries, we're using it to explore the relationship between mathematics and physics.
It's a very multidisciplinary science. We have physicists, which are probably the most common people who work on quantum computing, but we also have somebody who's in applied mathematics.
If you look at reality one way, you see physics. You look at it the other way, you see mathematics, and it's actually both.
We're in that same kind of moment in time where we're looking at the first or second transistor here. There's a revolution taking place, and it's kind of exciting to watch it play out.
It represents a way that humans can expand the knowledge that they have and the problems that they're able to solve.
It's a game changer for the corporation, it's a game changer for our customers, and ultimately it's a game changer for humanity. Computationally, this is the equivalent of the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. Quantum information science, quantum computing certainly has the potential to be a turning point in history. This machine is the first practical step that will essentially reset us on Moore's curve.
Moore's law is an observation that the number of transistors on a chip doubles over a certain time period, or the cost of the transistors halves.
But we now know today that there is a limit to how small you can shrink things, how many transistors you can cram onto a single chip.
So that's going to bound human capability for tackling certain problems. This machine offers an alternative.
And this might be considered the rebirth, maybe, of analog computing for solving certain kinds of problems.
Optimization is searching for the best possible answer among a large set of answers.
These are the kinds of problems that cannot be solved by calculations with classical digital computers.
For example, it would take many times the age of the universe to try to identify the folded state of a protein. And yet nature can do this in seconds, or maybe minutes. It's had billions of years to think about it. We're trying to solve similar kinds of optimization problems.
It mimics nature to find the minimum or the maximum of a design space.
If we can simulate 20 years of evolution in 10 nanoseconds, then we could evolve our engineering systems to be much more successful than what they are now, and it would cost very little. If we actually tried to do that in reality, the cost would be horrendous, and the amount of time it would take would be intolerable.
The most important thing to remember about ordinary computers is that they work with bits, which can be either 0 or 1. In quantum computing, the fundamental unit of information is not a classical bit of 0 or 1, rather it's a qubit, a quantum bit, which can be in a superposition.
Superposition means that the system is in some mixture of the 1 state and the 0 state.
And as a result of that, when you have a string of these quantum bits, you get a multitude of possibilities. So if you have 2 quantum bits, you have 4 possibilities, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. Those all coexist. And a quantum computer can parallel process all these possibilities.
The idea of a quantum computer is that you build it based on quantum physics, the physics of the very small, rather than classical physics, which is the physics of the large world we see around us. When you get down to smaller scales, things become probabilistic, things interact with different physical effects than the ones we can see on a large scale, or those physical effects manifest themselves in different ways. Quantum computers exploit these probabilistic phenomena in a way that makes a new kind of problem solving possible.
Let's say you're climbing mountains, and you're looking for the deepest valley in this mountainous landscape.
Probably what you will do is begin to walk downhill, and you will continue to walk downhill until you start to walk back uphill. You'll say, I went through the minimum, and you'll turn back around until you find that one point where you're not moving up or down, but you're just stationary. And you can think of ground state as being that lowest possible energy state.
In quantum mechanics, we're allowed to perform something called tunneling. We can literally go through walls.
With this particular machine, it's based on a simulation of this thermodynamic process that includes quantum mechanical effects that allows it to continue to explore the space around that valley without actually climbing up and over and being restarted, but to essentially tunnel through the mountain and find out if there is actually a lower valley on the other side. And it will continue to do that until it reaches the ultimate lowest valley.
It's always an interesting one to explain to a layperson because it's one of the really weird things that happens with quantum mechanics. And the fact that you have weird things happening in quantum mechanics is because you can exploit these effects that you don't have in your toolbox when you have a classical computer.
There are a lot of problems that are provably very hard, NP-complete or NP-hard in the jargon.
And you want to use the shortest path possible, or you want to route things in a way so that they all arrive simultaneously. So you're looking for an optimization in terms of time management or resource allocation or minimizing path lengths.
Of course, people have been trying to solve them with clever heuristics for half a century.
Using a quantum computer, we would hope to be able to develop algorithms that allow some improvement in the calculations of these problems.
It allows us to consider problems that prior to today have been beyond the scope of anything that we thought was possible.
Problems of energy, healthcare, transportation. The list of problems that we're all familiar with, those can all be eventually solved.
The idea of having hardware that can essentially drive straight to the solution, perhaps better than our clever heuristics, is really attractive.
It's our mandate, it's a moral, ethical requirement that we look at applying those capabilities to where they will do the most good in the future.
Google and NASA have teamed up to share one of the world's first commercial quantum computers. This machine, made by Canada's D-Wave, will be installed in a NASA research center in California. Quantum computing has the potential to work millions of times faster than the computers we're used to. That's because it stores and handles information in a totally different way. Standard computers use tiny switches called transistors, and they're either on or off. The computer sees that as a 1 or a 0. Now, quantum computers work in a new, unexpected way. Instead of transistors that are on or off, it uses things called qubits. And here's where it gets interesting. As well as being either a 0, a qubit can also be both at the same time. It's this extra state of being two things at once that allows quantum computers to do more things at once, therefore bringing about a quantum leap in terms of power. Well, the computer NASA and Google will be using has to be stored within a special shielded room. Now, that may sound impractical, but just remember that's exactly how standard computers started out.
Computations are over in a matter of minutes, and then the results are recorded on magnetic tapes.
Of course, these early machines were about as powerful as pocket calculators, and they were only specifically trained, or rather specially trained operators who could use them. It didn't take long for them to shrink down to desktop size and increase massively in power, and now our mobile phones and tablets run many thousands of times faster than those first machines. So quantum computers have the potential to completely change how we use technology in the future. Here to discuss when and how it could happen is Lance Ulyanov. He's the editor-in-chief of Mashable.com. Thanks for joining us. Are you as excited as the scientists seem to be?
Yeah, well, having computers that work in a wholly different way than I'm used to, than my phone or my desktop computer, is exciting, and not just because they do things differently, but potentially they do things better. They're just, the computational power is off the charts, but it's also really hard to understand how something can be two things at once. But it's about those possibilities. It's about its ability to ingest and weed through the possibilities and almost see around corners in ways that other computers can't do. You know, typical computers kind of use raw power to work out a problem. They work out every permutation, but they do it almost sequentially, as opposed to this quantum computing sort of uses the laws, the mechanics of physics to cut through everything to reach a brand new conclusion. All that said,
right.
I know that some people, when I was researching this, it was interesting to see how some people still don't really believe it does what they think it can do, even though researchers say, yeah, this stuff really works. But part of the problem is that it's spent more time sort of looking at sort of almost statistics as opposed to solving real-world problems. And I think the really interesting thing about NASA and Google getting together is that we may have more tangible evidence of what quantum computing can do.
All right, so it's going to take a while for Google to work that out with NASA, because they want to use the NASA Center, if I'm right,
yes.
In saying, to find out how this might advance and how fast it could be in terms of artificial intelligence, voice recognition,
right.
that kind of thing. Will it be good for business?
Well, business is always going to be risk averse. I mean, they're not going to put their trust in something that is, as you just said, fairly untested. I mean, can it do artificial intelligence? Can it solve these problems? And I think, you've got two, great entities, Google, a massive company with a lot of data, and NASA, a great sort of center of research that are going to look into it. But businesses want something they can depend on, also something that is cost effective. These computers cost millions and millions of dollars for one single computer.
Wow. But presumably, over a period of time, one would expect the cost of these computers to become less, as indeed the size of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what happens with computing. It's certainly what's happened with standard binary-based computing, and it's happened even faster than we anticipated. It's about 30 years down the road since they started talking about quantum computing, and so we're here, which also means that the timeline is moving a lot slower. I'm not sure
right.
if in my lifetime I'll get to own a quantum computer.
Let me ask you a question about genetics. Will it change diagnosing and treating genetic diseases? And I have to jump in here as well and say, what are the implications for our privacy, our health, but also our individual privacy?
Well, so the quantum computer's ability to look at so many different permutations simultaneously, to do those two things at once, with genetic material, which is so dense and so complex, and DNA, it to me is very exciting, because you have to imagine that quantum computers could do a better job than regular computers at looking at all the various permutations of diseases. That's what's exciting. On the privacy side, I just mentioned Google. Google is a company with a heck of a lot of data. Who is that data all about? It's all about you. If Google has the world's most powerful computer to look at everything about you and everyone in the world, well, I don't know. Hopefully they will use it as a force for good.